Hi, my name is Tasny Markovich, and I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Wyoming at Casper. My project is titled Possible Effects of Branding and Advertising on Taste Perception of Similar Light Beer. Before we dive into the research that I've done, I'll discuss why I decided to do this project. First of all, I'm 21 years old, and like many people my age, drinking is an interesting activity for me. For the last 9 months, I've been bartending, and like anyone who does or has worked in the service industry, I've had some very opinionated customers. Specifically, I noticed that many people strongly like one or two of these beers shown here, while they strongly dislike the others. I found this to be interesting as they are all very similar beers, so I wanted to find out if people's strong opinions are warranted or not. My hypothesis going into this research is that brand identification affects taste perception, which will be shown through people not being able to select their favorite beer from a group of similar beers. In order to test my hypothesis, I conducted a taste testing session. Before we get into that specifically, though, let's look at what I needed first. The most important thing for this to work was to have participants. And what a better place to find people willing to sample beer than a liquor store. There were 29 participants, which were customers at Second Street Discount Liquor. For the materials, we obviously had to have the beer. We had all cans of Bud Light, Coors Light, Miller Lite, and PBR. They were kept on ice to remain cold, which is their optimal serving temperature. We also needed 3-ounce paper cups that were labeled A, B, C, or D for the participants to drink from. There was also unsalted crackers and water provided for the participants to cleanse their palates between each sample. But now let's see how the experiment was carried out. Each participant began by filling out a survey. They were asked questions about their demographics, their drinking habits, to rank Bud Light, Miller Lite, Coors Light, and PBR in order of best tasting to worst tasting, and how strong their preference was of their favorite beer that they chose. While they filled out the survey, we poured beer into the cups that were labeled behind the counter. They could use any strategy to taste the beers as long as they were all presented at the same time. The participants, after drinking beers A through D, ranked them on the survey again. The two rankings could be used to compare what they think tastes the best based on brand identity and between what actually tastes the best to them based on the taste test. Now that we know how it was done, let's see what happened. The main result that I found was that only 41% of the participants were able to identify their favorite beer, as you can see here. On top of that, a mere 14% of the participants selected all 4 beers in the same order of preference before and after tasting them. Another thing that I found intriguing was that 31%, which isn't too far off of the 41% here, selected completely opposite beers. What I mean by this is that either the participants selected one beer as their favorite of the group before the taste test and then selected that same beer as their least favorite after tasting the beers, or they selected one beer as their least favorite of the group before tasting and then selected that same beer as their favorite after the taste test. Overall, people were not able to distinguish between what they thought they liked and what they actually liked. But now let's look at how people did by comparing each brand. Overall, Bud Light drinkers, or people that selected Bud Light as their favorite of the group, were the worst at identifying their beer in the taste test. And they did so only 22% of the time. On the other hand, PBR drinkers were the most successful in identifying their beer. But let's compare this to how much they spent on advertising, as seen on the right-hand side of the table. Bud Light spends the most on advertising, while PBR spends the least. Bud Light and Coors Light are owned by the same company called Miller Coors, so that's why the $417 million is applied to both of them there. From this table, the more that a company spends on advertising is inversely proportional to the degree that drinkers of their beer are able to identify that beer. But now let's see what other factors affected the results. One thing that I did not expect was for the low preference group to be able to identify their favorite beer better than the high preference group. On the survey, participants were asked about how much they preferred their favorite beer they selected before the taste test. Answers they could select ranged at the top from "it is my all-time favorite beer," and then gradually progressed through 5 options down to "it is very similar to the other options, but I had to pick one of them to be number 1. Of these 5 options, the top 2 were determined high preference and the bottom 2 were determined low preference in order to come up with these numbers. It was no surprise that the youngest age group selected their favorite beer the least percentage of the time, at 22%, while all the other ages ranged from 40 to 60% of the time. There weren't any other demographic trends that seemed to influence the results, except for age. But now that we know what happened, let's review the main findings. The majority of the participants did not select the same beer as their favorite beer before and after the taste test, which supports my hypothesis that people cannot distinguish their favorite beer from similar options, such as we have presented in the study. This shows that brand identification does affect taste perception, as what people thought they liked didn't turn out to be what they actually liked. We saw the relationship between how much a company spends on advertising and how well their drinkers are able to identify their product. This points towards the idea that advertising may influence a drinker's taste perception based on that brand's identity. Also, it didn't matter how strongly our participants preferred their favorite beer of the group, as both the high and low preferences were extremely similar in their ability to distinguish their favorite beer. But now, let's move on and discuss the significance of the results. As I stated earlier, the advertising that a company does may have influenced the results. That, along with the results that we have come with, is significant to both consumers and the beer producers. Consumers can be more open to trying brands that they don't think that they like, while beer companies can continue to pour millions of dollars into advertising because it seems to get consumers to think that they like their beer a lot more than they actually do. Even with these results, there are some limitations, though. First and foremost, this was a really small sample size. More people will need to participate in this study for the findings to become more reliable. Also, there may not be a direct link between the findings and advertising, as correlation does not necessarily mean causation. More studies can be done in order to better link the effects of advertising to taste perception. Before I wrap this up, though, I would like to take a moment to thank those who made this project possible. First, I would like to thank Jason Gosselin for helping with the data collection. We collaborated about how we wanted to do it, and then he was actually there helping collect data. Second, I need to send a big thanks out to Second Street Discount Liquors for allowing us to use their facility to collect the data. It worked to our advantage to have participants come to us rather than to have to seek them out. I would also like to thank Dr. Lanier and my fellow classmates for their input and guidance throughout the duration of the project. It definitely helped better the outcome of the whole thing. And lastly, thanks to all of those who volunteered and took their time to participate. The study obviously could not have been done without the participants' participation. And while I'm at it, thank you all for being here. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Thank you.